Welcome into the 14. This is the Wednesday edition. I'm your host, Chris Lee. It's just Blake Lovell and I today. Blake, not a huge news day, but we got some baseball and hoop stuff to start with. Let's start with Kentucky's Devin Askew has landed at Texas. Not a surprise. He's been in the portal, but just wanted to hit that off the top of the bat.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, just we've seen this before with Kentucky or some of these guys. I mean, it's not like he didn't play. He's someone who played probably around 30 minutes a game last year, and was a key contributor for them at times. But yeah, just as we always say, change of scenery, not always a bad choice for some of these guys. And for him, he goes from Kentucky to Texas, and a place that I think that, as we've said before, I think Chris Beard will have Texas probably as a top 10 program in the country moving forward. And he just, he has a chance to join some good talent there at Texas. They're getting Andrew Jones back too. So I think Texas will be pretty good right off the bat for Chris Beard. But yeah, it's just one of those where, as we always say with Kentucky, when you get some of these guys, sometimes it's a good fit, sometimes it's not. Playing at Kentucky is a different animal than a lot of other places. And just for whatever reason, he felt like he could find a better fit elsewhere, and you can do much worse than going and playing for Chris Beard. So,
well, Gary Parrish over at CBS Sports has come up with his top 25 and one for next year. Of course, this is a moving thing as players coming and going all over the country, but the SEC's got a significant presence here pretty early.
Yep, they do, and as no surprise, the one near the top is Alabama, which he's got at number 3. We talked about it in terms of Alabama. I mean, I said I thought they would, after getting Noah Gurley, I thought they'd be a top 5 team, and sure enough, it looks like he agrees and has them at number 3. With all that they're going to return, I can't say I'm shocked at that at all. Again, I've even seen Alabama fans make the case that they should be number 1. I don't know that they'll be number 1, but I mean, look, preseason polls are what they are. I always say that. We have fun with them. They're enjoyable to talk about, but they absolutely mean nothing. But there's no doubt that Alabama should be one of the best teams in the country, at least to start next season. And then you go beyond that. I mean, we said it with Arkansas. Arkansas could be a team that really has a chance to once again have a shot, at making a potential Final Four and all of that next season. And he has them at number 8. So, I mean, isn't that what we talked about? Is like, I think some people thought that this was just going to be a 1-year thing. Like the casual fan, I think, was thinking, all right, well, things will go back to Kentucky being at the top and all this, but it's just not the case. Like, and look, this preseason poll, which again doesn't mean a whole lot, but it supports the fact that Alabama and Arkansas are not going anywhere. Like with Eric Musselman and Nate Oates in those 2 spots, they are not going anywhere. I think they're going to be perennial top 15 teams every single season as long as those 2 guys are head coaches there. And I think this is kind of just the starting point. And to have both of them, this is one person's poll, but I don't think it's that far off at all in terms of having Alabama at 3, Arkansas at 8. So
Kentucky is where? 14, 15 here? 15.
yeah.
Look, I'm not saying I believe this. I'm just thinking out loud here. Kentucky, has it reached the point where it's not the program to beat by default? I mean, I guess it has, right? Because, I mean, we're seeing 2 teams ahead of Kentucky already in the SEC, according to Gary Parrish, and I think a lot of people would agree with that. But I'm looking at Ken Pom rankings. Kentucky's only finished in the top 10 of Ken Pom once in the last 4 years. Is this a trend or just a weird time?
Well, I think it's probably a little bit of both, just in terms of, and that's the thing, is we always say it, especially in this landscape. Like, let's look at the whole transfer dynamic. As we said, I mean, look at the numbers. They speak for themselves. 1361 now. That's how many transfers we have in the portal. And I think, it's not just a matter of Kentucky doing something, like, it's just, I don't know, like, it's sort of the dynamic has shifted in terms of it was just Kentucky and Duke getting all the one and done players, and that was that. But it's not really that case anymore. Like, it's Kentucky's getting those guys. They're getting some that are going to certainly play at the next level, but it's just becoming harder and harder, I think, to have that sustained success because transfers are completely changing the game. Whereas we've said before, someone like Eric Musselman, who can work the transfer portal, masterfully, that can elevate Arkansas. And it's the same with other programs around the country. Like some of these programs can get elevated just based on the fact that they're able to bring in talent. Whereas before, Kentucky, most of the talent they brought in has been the 5-star freshmen. But they don't have that experience that some of these other guys that maybe are transferring into other places and elevating those teams can give them. So I think it's one of those things where we're just going to have to watch it here moving forward because, and we've said this before. I mean, North Carolina, Duke, programs like that. I think it's just becoming harder and harder now just to be able to use that name brand of Kentucky, Duke, and Carolina to get all of the top players because, again, you're not just doing it from a freshman recruiting standpoint anymore. It has a lot to do with transfers and teams that maybe were taking longer to develop their 3-star and 4-star guys to catch up with the Kentucky, Carolina, and Duke and all their 5-stars. They don't have to do that necessarily anymore because they can just go out and get experienced players that have averaged 15 to 20 somewhere else and can come in and elevate their program right away. So I think that's the dynamic that started to shift, and I don't think it's a coincidence. We've started to see that, with Kentucky, maybe just in the transfer era picking up the way that it has. So I think it's something to keep an eye on. Now, look, they've got two really good ones coming in this year, Kellen Grady and Oscar Sheboy. And they're going to, make them, I think, give them an opportunity to have a really good season. But I do think it's one of those where the SEC basketball has gotten so much better. It's gotten so much more competitive to where I just don't think it's going to be one of those every single season. We're just going to say, all right, Kentucky's number one. Who's number two? I just don't see that happening at this point. Now, look, they're going to have some really good teams, and there are going to be years where they are maybe far and away better than some of the others. But I just don't see that happening right now.
Okay, this is cherry picking because it's starting with a bad year, but they have now finished outside the top 10 in Ken Palm more than they finished inside it out of the last 9 years.
Well, yeah.
Starting in 13, here are their rankings 55, 13, 1, 6, 4, 17, 8, 29, and 49. Now, Ken Palm's not the end all be all, but I think it's the ranking most of us probably use and trust the most. And I don't know. I don't think it's what we thought it was going to be when he starts his career 35-3 in 2010. Then he's 29-9. Then he's 38-2. Now he did have one more year like that, the 38-1 season of 2015. But it's really, and he's come under fire for it at Kentucky, right? There has been a discernible drop off.
Well, and look, what's the stat? I'm trying to remember because I'm the one that put the stat up, and I was like, I'm trying to remember what I can't find it right now. But when you remember the stat that we talked about in the NCAA tournament, was it? I think it was 9. Was it 9 different schools that have had a team in the Sweet 16 in the past 4 NCAA tournaments? I think it was 9. I may be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure it was 9.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
So think about that. Maybe. Look, this year I think you kind of throw out this season, but like we're seeing a trend where Kentucky can still be good, but there are other teams that are getting to that level now. And, look, that's more than half of the league that sent a team to the Sweet 16 in the past 4 tournaments. So I think that's something, too, to where the competition was not there before. Like we were talking about, you could go through some of those years and you would struggle to find 3 teams you felt like were quality, or even 2 teams, quality teams outside of Kentucky. And now it's just not the case. Like you can go up and down the line, as we said, as of right now, Alabama, Arkansas probably feel like they're national title contenders going into next year. Auburn, Tennessee, some of those teams like that, Florida. There are a lot of other teams that have really taken their program to sort of a spot to where they're able to have success. And as we said, if I'm pretty sure the number was 9, that's a lot of different schools that have had success in a 4-year span. And I think, overall, when you look at it, that's significant. And I think the number, what was it? I think Georgia was the only team that has not made the NCAA tournament in the past. I don't remember. I did the numbers on that one too. But Georgia was the only team that hasn't made the tournament in a certain amount of years. So I think that's what you're seeing is it's no longer just Kentucky and let's see who those 2 or 3 other teams that come up behind them are. It's everyone. Like you're grouping Kentucky in with Alabama, with Arkansas, with Tennessee, LSU, Auburn, all these other teams because all those programs have gotten to a point now to where they've proven they can be sort of national contenders. And I just don't think we haven't seen that sort of landscape in SEC basketball in a long time. So I think that plays a role too.
Okay, John Calipari was, in my mind, the first guy to bring the pro mentality to the SEC.
Yeah.
Is that fair with the
Yes.
the dribble drive offense and the things? And so he's a forward thinking guy. But I want to ask you, you tell me if this is fair or not fair, or we just can't know. Has he kind of been outdone at his own game by Musselman and Oates?
Well, I mean, that's the thing is I think you're seeing that those guys have understood, I think, the what it takes to be able to adapt and catapult yourselves above what Kentucky's doing. And that's what I think overall is, yes, like Musselman, Oates, they're bringing in top freshmen. Like we're seeing some of these guys that we talk about so much as top freshmen, but I think what they've at least done better to this point, and this is not to knock any of those transfers that Kentucky's had in, but let's face it, like Oates and Musselman specifically, I think just given you can go back to Nevada with him. They have when they swing in the the transfer portal, like they hit home runs. That's sort of how it feels at this point in terms of guys that come in and sort of help their program, and take them to that next level. So I think that's the thing is, and maybe this is sort of one of those years where we find out with Kellen Grady and Sheboy, like we said, at Kentucky, that feels like, a 1-2 punch there of guys that you think could come in and really, push Kentucky back up. Like we don't expect Kentucky to be 9-16 next season. It's just probably not going to happen. But I think you have to keep an eye on it though, because some of these teams have done such a good job of not only recruiting, against Kentucky at times, which I mean, look, let's point out too. Like Kentucky's still going to get some of the top recruits. Like it's just going to happen. And I don't think that's going anywhere. But that's what I said earlier is I think some of these other teams are further along because they don't have to get the chemistry going in the first 2 or 3 months of the season to maybe finally hit that run late. Whereas they can start maybe a little ahead of a team like Kentucky, just because they're adding more experience and maybe guys who've already proven it at this level. So I think Kentucky getting into the transfer game is good for them, but at the end of the day, it's one thing to get transfers, but it's another thing to get transfers that are actually going to be the right fit for your program and to help you have success. And I don't know that consistently they've done that thus far. I mean, again, you could point to this last year's team. So I think that's the thing is, they've got to start having a better percentage in terms of maybe those truly impact guys that can sort of take them to that next level along with the freshmen that they're going to have.
Okay, I don't watch him and sense that he's like lost his energy or passion. So I'm not saying that, but I am saying this. He's 62. At some point, everybody's career ends, right? The success has not been there. Um, the buyout, I think, is pretty crazy. If they wanted to get rid of him, and on top of that, what he's making 9.3 million a year, that's a heck of an incentive to stick around. How much longer do you think this lasts for him at Kentucky? I mean, what if he does have another one of these years where they end the season not in the top 25 or don't win a tournament game? Where does this go for Kentucky if the ship doesn't get turned around, say in the next year or so?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, I just don't anticipate Kentucky being the one to make the move, unless you said, like it just gets to a point to where it is just, I don't know, like it's sort of that point to where maybe there is no return for either side. But I don't think Kentucky's going to be the one that maybe puts itself in that position because we say so many times, be careful what it's just sort of, I mean, it's one of those situations where, and it's completely different with South Carolina. Like we said, we talked about the Frank Martin situation, but, they, like it or not, Kentucky wants to win a national championship every year. Unfortunately, as we've talked about in sort of the changing landscape of college basketball, that's really hard to do now. This isn't the, Wooden era of UCLA. This is just a much different dynamic in terms of, the tournament and just the way things set up every single year. So even though that's their goal is to get, win a national championship, make a Final Four every year, it's really hard to do in this landscape. And I think the way this plays out to me is for John Calipari, I don't know when it's going to be, but I do think if the right NBA job becomes available, I do think he'll entertain it. And we have this discussion every single off season, right? It's one where you'll see him linked to all these different jobs, and all this other stuff. But I don't think he's going to the NBA for just any job. I think it would have to be for him. I think it would have to be the perfect scenario. The Lakers becoming available, and an opportunity to coach LeBron and Anthony Davis. Sure, I think anyone would be interested in that. But I think those are the kind of things that maybe you look at for him, at least from maybe his perspective, if he wants to, which, the NBA is a grind. I'm not going to sit here and say the NBA is not, but if you want to get away from the grind of the Kentucky basketball job and recruiting and all this other stuff, certainly I could see him entertaining the idea of going back to the NBA before he calls it quits for his career. But otherwise, he said it before, like for him, like he has the best job in the country. And I think it's one where I don't see them just all of a sudden. We talked about the trend with the numbers and all that and how much more competitive the SEC's gotten, but I just don't see a scenario where Kentucky's just going to be sitting outside of, the top five like they were this year. I think they're going to be right there every single year, but I still think it's going to be interesting to kind of see if there's anything that maybe piques his interest a bit at the next level.
Anything else hoops related? Oh, we did neglect to mention Tennessee is number 25 in the top 25 and one. I think that surprised you a bit.
Yeah, I would probably put Auburn ahead of Tennessee right now. And look, I mean,
which he did, by the way.
Oh, he did. I didn't see Auburn in there, unless I'm.
No, Auburn's in there. Auburn is. Let me pull mine up. I've got too many windows open.
Sorry, I may have been looking at a wrong one. But
Auburn is 21 in this.
Okay.
The comment being Auburn's front court of Jabari Smith and Walker Kessler. Minette being the best front court in the SEC.
Well, maybe I'm looking at the wrong one because I don't see Auburn on mine. You've got Alabama at 3, right? Arkansas at 8.
No, I have Alabama at 4. I have Alabama at 4, Arkansas at 9. I think you might need to clear your cache out there. But Kentucky 15, Auburn 21, and Tennessee 25. This was updated, I think, late on Tuesday night.
Okay. Okay. I've got one that says April the 12th, so that would have been Monday, right? Okay. Well, There's your problem. All right. Well, you beat me to it there. So whatever I said about Alabama and Arkansas earlier, still in good shape. But yeah, I think that, I think Auburn, like I said, I felt like we talked about with Walker Kessler and the other guys they've added too with Green and all that. Arkansas in a good spot. I just think there's still a lot of unknowns with Tennessee. That to me is the biggest thing right now. Could they be a top 25 team? Absolutely. I mean, they've got Kennedy Chandler coming in, and obviously we talked about Justin Powell. But I mean, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot to replace there, isn't there? And I don't know necessarily as of this moment that I would put Tennessee in the top 25, even with those two guys coming in. I mean, you've got to have a little bit more than that to me to be able to really maybe take that next step. Which they've got some guys coming back too, but I don't know. I think I'm a little bit more hesitant on Tennessee right now. Maybe it's just based on the frustrations with them this past season, but they got a lot of talent to replace there too. So.
Well, it's funny how perception has changed on Rick Barnes just in a few months, right? Because when he got to Tennessee, he'd been to 16 to 17 NCAA tournaments at Texas, and the thought was he'd underachieved and should have done more and all those things. And, of course, Texas is a place where you can recruit well. And then he comes to Tennessee, and frankly, Donnie Tyndall set him up nicely, right? Because they had a lot of really good, hard-nosed, undervalued players, which he quickly meshed into a championship-level team.
Yeah.
Well, in the meantime, let me let you go ahead and then I'll finish.
No, I was going to say you're right. Like that's just kind of a scenario where, I mean, early on, like I think there were people wondering, was this going to be the right fit? And then though, when you had those teams like Grant Williams and Schofield and those guys sort of break out the way they did, that alleviated some of those issues a bit. But I mean, still, like we said, the expectations have been pretty high for them, especially last season. I think it's one where, maybe they do wind up being a top 25 team this season, but as of right now, I don't know. I think that they've got some things they need to prove before I'm probably ready to anoint them as a potential top 25 team right now. So,
well, nobody wanted those kids that he won with, right?
Right.
And he made him into a title team. And the thing was that everybody's doubt on him at that point when he got to Tennessee is, can he recruit? Well, next thing you know, it's Josiah Jordan James and Jaden Springer and Keon Johnson and these guys who could play anywhere, right?
Yeah.
And then last year, I'm not going to say they fall on their face because they earned what a 5 seed, 6 seed, whatever it was.
Yeah.
Um, and they had a nice year, but it was very disappointing. I think most people thought they'd win the league. Then you have Springer and Johnson gone, so you don't really get to build on those guys. You just bring in the next bunch of guys, and now it's like, well, what can he do with Bailey and Vescovi, and Jordan James is still around that nobody saw that coming, and now you add Kennedy Chandler and Justin Powell and those kids, and so I don't know. I'm kind of with you. It's kind of like it's gone from this. He did way more than anybody expected. And you had this one but over here but can he recruit? And then he recruits better than anybody has at Tennessee recently. And it just didn't really work the way we thought it would. And I just think now the people that are my buddies that follow that program and are Tennessee fans I'm not going to say they want him gone. That's not fair at all. I don't think that's what they want. And I don't think that he should be. But it is interesting to see how, like, he sort of closed the objection, and now with better players, he's winning a lot less.
And it's the same discussion I think we've had with Kentucky, because it's just like the expectations are only getting higher because you're seeing what Alabama's doing, what Arkansas is doing, what Auburn has done. That's the problem I think in this is that. And look, this is why guys get fired, right? This is why we've seen SEC programs make coaching changes in recent years because they all see some of these teams that have had the success. As we said, 9 teams being able to make a run to the second weekend of the tournament. And I think it's just like that only elevates the expectations for a lot of programs. And if you're one like Tennessee, who's already had high expectations, and people already expect you to be a top 25 team, every single season, then it becomes harder, and that pressure gets a little bit more, higher in terms of from a staff perspective, from a player's perspective. So it's going to be interesting for them moving forward. They've got, they've had some coaching, or they've got to sort of redo their staff. I mean, they've already added guys, but you're having some staff turnover, which it's not always a bad thing because you got guys who are good enough to go get a head coaching job, but that's going to be sort of a new part of it this year. And then, as we said, you've got to replace some older guys on that roster and the younger guys who are going to be probably lottery picks. So, it's going to be an interesting season for them. But as I said, I just don't think right now I would probably look at Tennessee and say I would feel confident about putting them, right there on that same level as any of those, probably 4 in particular: Alabama, Arkansas, Auburn, Kentucky, and then even I think a team like Florida I would probably put ahead of Tennessee right now. So,
where do you put Mississippi State in all this?
Well, I mean, that's the theme of the podcast, right? It seems like I don't ever give Mississippi State enough credit. I'm just kidding.
Well, but you know what? You and I were on opposite ends of that. They and Florida were the teams that I think we differed on, and LSU to some degree.
Yeah.
And I think we kind of balanced each other out because with State, you had a point, right? They weren't consistent. They had some bad losses. But I would watch them, and I would see the talent. I thought they had a couple of good posts inside, one of whom is gone. And I thought that Stewart and Molinar are really talented guards and get them back next year, which I think, unless I've missed something, both are coming back, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
I mean, you see these teams all the time that have these 18 and 15 type seasons like they had. State made a run in the NIT, and that just kind of sets themselves up for the big year the next year. I don't know why State. I figured that you might see them popping up in some polls, and I'll give you full disclosure here. They may have suffered some casual losses that I have not noticed. But to me, that's a team, and Ben Howland really has kind of been a disappointment there. They've not gotten where I think we thought he might take them, but that's a team that I could see making a jump. I know the deficiencies, but sometimes when talented sophomores become juniors, especially in a league where it's a revolving door elsewhere and you have some built-in continuity that other teams don't, to me, that's a team I'm kind of watching to see if they can take the jump. Now, the fact that they've not done better gives me pause, but I think it's worth a mention at least.
Yeah, I think as of right now, which again, I'm just saying this off the top of my head, I really need to study all the rest of the rosters, but when you think about what they have coming back, I think they're probably, a good shot to be a top half team. I don't really have a lot of doubt about that because with those 3, sophomores that they'll have coming back, they'll be juniors next year, but I think that's that's going to be one of the better nucleuses just in terms of guys who have played together. So I think they'll have a shot to certainly I think be in the conversation for an NCAA tournament bid. But I mean I always say it like that's a that's a tough place to win. I don't care who you are. We've seen it over the years. Like Mississippi State is a hard job. And I just, I get the frustrations with Ben Howland in terms of maybe them not reaching that level of success, but I don't know. You go up and down, and I just don't think that's ever really. I mean, yes, Rick Stansbury, you can point out what he did there, but I don't know that that's necessarily an easy job either when you compare it to some of the others and recruiting and all that other stuff. So
Well, let me ask you because this is a good segue. Howland is going to be 64 entering next year, and they've been to the tournament once.
I think once or twice, right?
I'm looking it up. Okay, they've been once.
Yeah,
That'll be year 7.
and
I
then
think
lost in the first
everybody
round to
expected
Liberty.
more. Yeah, no wins. Been to the NIT, the semifinals twice. Was the runner-up once. Of course, last or 2 years ago, or last year, I guess it was, the COVID season. I don't remember if they would have been in the tournament or not. They were fourth in the league. He's 51 and 57 in the SEC, but it's kind of that almost that Andy Kennedy thing, right? Where they're never terrible. Although Kennedy was more, boy, Kennedy's everything centered around 500 with him. Like, I don't know that Andy had a lot of, 11, 12 win seasons. Howland's had a couple of those. He's had 111 and a 10, I guess. I'm rambling here, but point is, he's kind of falling into that thing where they're not the worst team in the league usually, but the highs haven't been very high.
Well, and that's when we see, and look, I'm not saying he's going anywhere, but like,
That's how you get a coach fired. That's
right, that's what I was
textbook
going to say.
recipe to get a coach fired
Yeah.
is have some expectations and then just be kind of mediocre.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to say. We've seen programs make moves because of that, because of looking all around and saying, okay, well, how has Auburn gotten to this point? How has Alabama gotten to this point? All these other teams, like how have they been able to make this jump and really, for the most part, sustain the success they've had, aside from a year or two. I think that's when, the questions start to pick up. And that's what I said. I mean, it's, and I said it, it is a hard place to win. Now we've seen guys win there. Like I said, you go to the Stansbury era, and when Richard Williams was there, doing what they did back in the mid '90s. But I think still, it's not the easiest place to win at. But that doesn't necessarily matter at this point. Like it's the expectations are way too high because literally every single program in the SEC has committed now to basketball for the most part and said, we want to be one of those teams that can, have a chance to be a team that is in the NCAA tournament every single year. And unfortunately, as we know, you're not going to get all 14 teams into the tournament every year. But that is sort of the expectation and the way that it's changed. So I think it's an interesting season for them next year. As we said, with the nucleus they're going to have coming back, if they were to, let's say, go 18 and 15 again, I think that's where you really start to say, okay, maybe there's something sort of rumbling here, because I think that's a group that, with those three upperclassmen specifically, and look, they've got some guys coming in too. They should have a chance to have a pretty good season, and it's just a matter of seeing if they can turn that into a tournament bid.
If you're going schools most likely to make a coaching change in the SEC after next year, give me your top two because I've got my top two and I want to see if they jive with yours.
Well, I think that that's a good one. Like I still think South Carolina's on the board there. I know that they just gave him, what was the contract specifics? I don't even remember what they did on his contract, but I could just see some frustrations there again. And I've said this before, there's no reason to go back through it, but I just think there's probably frustrations on Frank Martin's side too, in terms of maybe what they do. Let me look. He got a 2-year contract extension through 24-25. So maybe it's not as feasible, but I still think if they struggle next year, I don't know. Maybe that's something where we saw frustration with those two this offseason already.
Well, and Carolina, as an aside, what they paid Will Muschamp $13 million to go away or whatever it was,
Yeah.
they're not afraid to write that check. Now, I
Well,
think there was some political pressure in the case this year but that's a school that's made those kind of moves before.
Yeah, and that's what I find interesting. And look, we talked about it a lot on previous episodes of the podcast, but I think I would still put that in there if they have a bad season because I just think, the frustration, as I said, maybe for South Carolina and the way they looked at it. Also, the frustration I think for Frank Martin could probably, reach a point after the season where maybe, he just doesn't want to put up with it. I don't know. But so that's one I would put on there. Let me see. The second one, going up and down the line here. I mean, I guess you could put Howland on there. I mean, I think that's a possibility. I've said it before. I think I don't like the Georgia thing's interesting to me, but I just don't know that they're gonna move that quickly with him. So that's one. The other one I would mention would be Florida. I've said that before. I think because I said like they've got a really good group they brought in, really good transfers. But if they were to struggle, I think next season, and let's say maybe you're on that line of once again maybe being an 8, 9, 10 seed, something like that. Even if they get to the tournament, I know they've said it from a standpoint, the administration said everything. And I don't really necessarily, I'm just saying this. I think there's a pretty low chance that they make any moves. But I also know that I see a Florida fan base that thinks that, they want to try to get back to the Billy Donovan era. I don't know how that's going to happen right now necessarily, but I do think the expectations are starting to say, all right, what is the next step for this program and can we reach it? Because as of right now, you look at the past 4 seasons, look at the past 4 seasons, they haven't won more than 21 games in a season, and maybe haven't reached that level that they wanted to reach after making that Elite Eight in 2017.
He strikes me, and coaches reinvent themselves all the time. Like all of a sudden, you get one big star that takes you to a Final Four where nobody expected it, and all of a sudden everybody looks at you in a different light. Then you get better recruits, and you just figure some things out. And you have it going, and in my mind, Mike White could be that guy. It wouldn't shock me, but he's never been below 500 overall in any of his seasons, either at Florida and Tech. He's never been below 500 in the league at Florida. And that doesn't seem like much until your program hits a down spell, and then you kind of value that a little
Right.
bit. And maybe you could say Florida is not a place where that should happen easily. Ever since Billy Donovan did the things he did there, that program is viewed differently. But I just see a guy who's done pretty well. Now, he's had double-digit losses in 5 of his 6 seasons overall, and the one time he didn't, they were 27-9. So there's that. You could say that they're not ever terrible, and I don't think they ever will be. But I think the ceiling is usually where you get judged more than anything. People judge you more on the ceiling than on the floor, and that's his issue. I think he kind of needs to jump up and have one of those elite 8 type years next year. Because you're right, I think the Florida fan base is sort of gone. I don't know if sour's the right word, but whatever. I mean, you've noted it before. We've talked about it. There is an issue there.
It's just a lack of consistency. Like the whatever year, several years ago, where they were, looked like at times the number 1 team in the country, and it just, you just never saw that consistency. I think for them to reach that level, and that's been the problem. And as we said, let's point this out too. This is more of a longer picture, bigger picture thing versus just this past season because we knew they were dealing with some very unique circumstances this past season. So I think that that's one you have to certainly put in perspective there. But overall, I just think that it's still a fan base that remembers what's possible there. And I think it's no different than Arkansas to me, where Arkansas remembers what they did in the mid '90s and all that, and thinking, okay, how do we reach this level? And I think for Florida, it's like, okay, well, how do we get back? Maybe we're not going to win back-to-back national championships, but how can we put our program in a position to where we at least have an opportunity, year in and year out to get to a Sweet 16 and be able to, be a top SEC team and be a national contender more consistently. I think that's the biggest thing. So,
Yeah, my top 3 in order, and I think I would go. I think I'd go Tom Crean at Georgia first because they've lost a lot of guys.
yeah,
And he's not really had a good season yet. I don't know that given the climate of the SEC right now, and the perception always with as many players is come out of that Atlanta area, that Georgia should be doing better. Now, history has not really backed that up a ton for whatever reason. Probably the school hasn't put a lot of money into things, but I think that's changed now. You see all schools in the SEC take basketball kind of seriously. To me, Crean is probably number one just because you've seen that roster crumble in the offseason, and I don't know if he can have. I just don't know that it's feasible for him to have like a 9 or 10 win season or whatever it would take to get the fans excited down there. That's my one. I would say Frank Martin is two for the reasons that you pointed out. I would have to think some trust has eroded there and all the things that you mentioned before, plus the fact that I don't know the roster is going to be that great coming into next year. And the third one I'm watching is Vandy because I don't think that the chancellor, who now runs that athletic department, is really happy with him. You've already seen him make a move on football coach and men's basketball coach. Now, having said that, I don't think Jerry Stackhouse is stupid. I don't think he's a terrible coach. And I think the effort in recruiting has been lacking. I think that has picked up noticeably lately. Everybody thinks Ed Conroy is going to be on that staff. I think it's just a formality of waiting to be announced. I think he has already brought them Liam Robbins from Minnesota who will help them. There's been some talk that he'll bring some more players with him. And so that may be the recipe for a quick turnaround. And of course, the thing we're all watching is, does Scottie Pippen Jr. come back?
Yeah.
Or does he stay in the draft? So that's one that could take. I mean, I could see that thing going to where they get Pippen back and maybe they sneak into the NCAAs and he gets a big reset. Or I could see it where Pippen doesn't come back. You have a key injury or something like that because, frankly, again, 1-8, 1-9, their talent's not great. So I could see that one going either way, just depending on some circumstances.
Yeah, I think the Pippen thing, as we talked about yesterday, that's going to be the big one to figure out where to place them. Because I was just thinking, we were talking about Georgia and South Carolina. I mean, right now, I don't put Georgia and South Carolina. I mean, they're in the double digits in terms of where you think that they're going to be in the SEC. Like, I don't really know exactly where I'd place them right now, but I just don't think I'm looking at them and saying I'm going to be able to place them above some of these other teams we've talked about. So it's going to be interesting. Yeah, I could, it's going to, whereas this year, as we said, this is sort of a different off season where we really didn't, I don't think we expected any moves to be made. And I don't, the South Carolina thing, that was just a bizarre thing to me. But I think that next season is sort of the one where, maybe we're not talking about just, we're certainly, I think we're probably going to be talking about a change somewhere. But we may be talking about multiple too, and that's where sort of, we've seen that. I mean, a couple years ago, like we talked about, I mean, Vandy, Arkansas, Bama, who else? Was it A&M maybe? I'm trying to think of the other one. It may have been A&M. You had sort of the reset at 4 or 5 different schools, and I think maybe next year, depending on some of the results, you could see that same scenario there. So
the program that I just have no idea where this is going is Texas A&M.
Yeah, I mean, I think he'll get a chance to. I mean, again, I know we're not talking about him next year, but I think he's going to get an opportunity there for a bit, just to be able to. Because I think you throw this last season out, like I don't even think you can judge them on this last season. I really don't, and I mean, it's just. I don't know how, as an administrator, you can look at this last season and say, all right, we can take this away from them. And I know they lost games and all this other stuff, but it's just, man, it's so hard to judge, I think, overall, just based on knowing that the expectations weren't really high for them coming into this season anyways, and knowing that you were kind of in a rebuilding spot. But, yeah, I mean, he's going to have to, he's going to have to recruit better, and there's going to have to be sort of a jump for them to make to hit that point. And I don't know. Like it's, I mean, it's. We've said it so many times. Like it's an uphill climb now because if you're Vanderbilt and you're A&M and Georgia and all these other teams, like you're looking up and saying, okay, is Alabama or Arkansas or Tennessee or Florida or Kentucky, like are they going to fall back to the point to where we can catch up at this point? And it's not easy to do. Once you put yourself kind of in that spot where maybe you go a couple years and you're kind of there at the bottom of the SEC. It takes quite a turnaround to be able to jump up and compete at the top half of this league right now as one of the better leagues in the country. So it's just, it's not easy to do.
Yeah, it's not the old SEC where a few schools really cared about basketball. Some schools cared when they were good, and then then you had Georgia and Auburn and everybody else.
Yeah.
like, and that falls into the category of people cared a little bit when they were good, but it's just not like that anymore. I think that Florida's underrated in this league anymore because it's just with so many teams carrying without a pass out on the schedule, getting to 9 and 10 wins consistently is harder than people think. I mean, you used to be able to do that, but it's just not. It's not so easy to pull off anymore.
No, very difficult, and yeah, so that'll be interesting to see kind of what decisions are made after this next season. So
Let's hit baseball quickly. I think the biggest two items in the league last night: Isaiah Thomas, Vanderbilt's right fielder, is back. Vanderbilt won last night. His offense still is not looking great. They're in a little bit of a slump, but he makes a big difference for them because the drop off from him to where they were going with replacements is pretty big. So he had a groin injury, hit a triple last night. So I think that answers some questions about that. So he'll be going to Knoxville with them. And the other one, which has not happened yet, Alabama saying Connor Prelip is going to be back, I think, pitching within the coming week. Again, he was probably a top 5 pitcher in the league coming in. So those are the two big news items in SEC baseball overnight.
yep, and I thought that which we mentioned this before we started recording, but Florida winning too, I thought was for that team, which we talked about so much now, and kind of knowing their schedule ahead, and the opportunity for them over the next couple weeks because they do play Missouri and Auburn. Just getting that win, I think, against Florida State, that gives you some confidence. Doing it on a walk-off, too, is always a nice momentum boost. I think the way they did it against Florida State there in extra innings. So, yeah, I think that, you guys talk about it on Thursday, but there's some interesting, it's sort of that, and you've said it, I mean, we've talked about it on the podcast, but it's sort of that very important point now for some of these teams, to start to either hit your stride and head in the right direction, or maybe some of the up and down inconsistencies sort of start to take you behind some of these other teams that we've seen really just jump up, of course, like Tennessee and others. So, yeah, it should be interesting to see kind of what for this weekend specifically with some of these series. But I thought Florida getting that win was pretty significant too, just for them heading into what should be two pretty winnable series here coming up for them.
Yeah, I guess the two biggest happenings overnight in terms of stuff on the field was that Georgia got a win over Georgia Tech, which should be a big RPI win, although I'm not seeing that right now. Let me look that up quickly.
I think it was Georgia State, wasn't it?
Oh, well, that would be no.
Wasn't it?
Yes, you're right. I don't know why I read Georgia Tech. They play Georgia Tech in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So never mind, scratch that. Loss avoidance, I guess is a good way to put it. Bad loss avoidance. So Florida was really the only team that. No, you know what it was at Auburn.
Auburn, that's right. That's what I was going to say. Yeah,
beat
it was
Georgia
Auburn.
Tech.
Yeah.
I knew somebody beat Georgia Tech. So that's kind of a non-event. They did get Auburn back in the top 100 of the RPI. So if they stay there, that changes some quad win dynamics for the rest of the league. I guess it'd be a quad 2 win if you beat Auburn now rather than a quad 3, I think is how it goes. But so not a whole lot of news. Florida's win the biggest one. Everybody else around the SEC won except for Missouri. So again, not a lot of wins here that move the needle, but you lose some of these midweek games and it dings your RPI a bit. So there's that. Really not a whole lot else to discuss in baseball. And, of course, we'll preview the weekend tomorrow with Barry on our show.
Yep, two big series. You guys kind of hit on a little bit on Tuesday. But, yeah, it should be fun with Vandy and Tennessee and then, Mississippi State and Ole Miss. So, yeah, those should be a lot of fun heading into the weekend. So.
Well, we got our pitcher rankings, our 14 for SEC pitchers up on the site at southeastern14.com. That's free, so go read that. I'll have the hitters up later today. I'm running the gauntlet of press conferences and on Zoom and podcasts and radio appearances today. So I'm going to have hitter rankings up. Hopefully that's earlier rather than later on Wednesday, but no promises made given what's ahead. But anyway, be sure and follow us on Twitter at 14 Southeastern. Be sure and rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast wherever you get them. And, of course, check out our free content every day at southeastern14.com. Blake, thanks for coming on today again, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Yep, sounds good. Like you said, check everything out, southeastern14.com. Yeah, lots of great stuff on the way over there.
All right, he's Blake Lovell. I'm Chris Lee. Thank you for listening to the 14. We'll see you again tomorrow.